So welcome to the webinar. Today we're going to have our two speakers. I'll start by introducing them. We've got Dr. Tara Garrity. She is a senior scientist and biodiversity lead at Tunley Environmental. So just to give a bit of a brief overview of Tunley, Tunley are a sustainability consultancy helping companies around the world to reduce their impact on their carbon emissions, enhance their impact on nature, conserve water and meet compliance with regulations. And joining her is the wonderful Benedicta Bakpa. She is the head of ESG at Bespak, and Bespak are a leading manufacturer of medical devices focusing solely on inhaled and nasal drug delivery. Benedicta has led ESG initiatives across the UK, Africa and the Middle East, and she holds a master's from the Imperial College of London and is a chartered environmentalist and IEMA member. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and I'm going to hand over to the wonderful Tara to start us off.
Thank you, Alice. Hi, everyone. It's titled The Nature Advantage Embedding Biodiversity into Business Strategy. So just to go over some of the learning objectives. So what is biodiversity? So if you boil down the definition of biodiversity in its simplest form, it is the variety of life on Earth. It incorporates everything from genes to genetics to species to ecosystems. And it's quite frankly what makes nature function, adapt, recover. And it's not just environmental concern. It underpins a lot of different sectors and a lot of different components within the society that we live in. So why is biodiversity important? It's critical because it underpins health, stability of ecosystems and human health, which in turn support what we call ecosystem services. Now, these are benefits that nature provides to people and to the economy, things like fresh air, clean water, pollination of crops, soil fertility, climate regulation, and even natural protection from flooding or disease. And these services aren't optional, they're foundations of life and of business. It's also important to consider the monetary impact that biodiversity has on our global economy. So according to World Economic Forum, over half of the global GDP, roughly around 44 trillion US dollars, which equates to roughly 33 trillion pounds, is moderately or highly dependent on nature. One of the most important shifts we're seeing now with sustainability is the breaking of these silos and the shift where we move away from siloed thinking. Traditionally, businesses have always approached sustainability in different sectors. So you'd have climate, you'd have health and biodiversity, and they'd be handled by different teams, reported through different frameworks, and tackled with different KPIs. But in reality, these systems are all interconnected. And when we lose biodiversity, for example, through deforestation or pollution, we also lose carbon sinks. Likewise, degraded ecosystems affect human health. The loss of green space contributes to respiratory problems, urban heat stress, reduced mental well-being, and it can even increase the risk of zoonotic diseases or diseases that are spread from wildlife to humans. On the flip side of that, restoring nature often delivers multiple co-benefits. A rewild landscape might improve biodiversity, sequester carbon, reduce flood risk, while also providing space for community recreation or even local agriculture. So rather than trying to tackle these challenges in isolation, we need integrated strategies. So when we talk about nature capital, what we're referring to is, again, those natural resources or the natural services, ecosystem services, or natural assets. These natural assets then generate the ecosystem services that we were just discussing. And these ecosystem services, or the flows of benefits, we rely on every day. So natural capital thinking encourages us to recognize, value, and account for these dependencies in the same way that we track financial or manufactured capital. It allows companies to quantify risks related to nature loss. It also allows companies to identify opportunities for nature positive investment or strategy, and it also helps make better long-term decisions for business and for biodiversity. So in this next section, I'm going to take you through some of the most noteworthy global standards and global regulations and frameworks. So the first one is the Global Biodiversity Framework, or GBF. And this was a landmark global agreement that aims to halt and reverse biodiversity loss by 2030. It was adopted at COP15 in December 2022, and it's often referred to the Paris Agreement for Nature. So for companies, it means two things. Proactive alignment with GBF targets is an opportunity to demonstrate leadership, resilience, and readiness, and inaction is an increasing risk. So whether or not you are a larger company or a smaller company, it's eventually going to come to the forefront for all businesses to start considering biodiversity. So another really noteworthy framework or regulation is the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, or the TNFD, and it's one of the most significant developments in sustainability reporting since the rise of climate disclosures. And it gives businesses a structured way to understand and disclose their nature-related risks and opportunities, much like TCFD did for climate. So this TNFD is built around the LEAP framework, and it's a 4-step framework that helps organizations integrate into nature into enterprise risk management and strategy. So the next one that is quite noteworthy is Science-Based Targets for Nature, or SBTN. And similarly, it has a 5-step approach. So while TNFD, which is the slide we were just on, helps businesses understand and disclose their nature-related risks, SBTN gives you a method for action, and it enables businesses to move from understanding their impacts to setting measurable science-based targets for nature. So the last one we'll talk about in this section is CSRD, specifically E4, biodiversity and ecosystems. So under CSRD E4, biodiversity is no longer a voluntary ESG topic. It's a core reporting requirement. And this includes disclosing, again, impacts and dependencies on ecosystems, pressures your business contributes to, such as land use, pollution, etc., location-specific risks and exposures across your operations and supply chain, and also mitigation measures and nature-positive actions you're taking in response. So the next section is going to be talking about from obligation to opportunity and turning compliance into action. So the next question becomes, how do we respond? Well, compliance is only one side of the coin. The real opportunity lies in these frameworks to drive smarter, more strategic action. Whether you're just starting out or already disclosing nature-related risks, these tools can support you in getting to the next level of your nature-positive journey. So nature-based solutions they're a critical delivery mechanism for biodiversity and climate goals. And again, this is really highlighting the fact that the way forward is not this siloed approach of climate, actions are over here and biodiversity is over here. We need to start considering it as an interdisciplinary approach. So that is what nature-based solutions do exactly. And they're actions that work to enhance natural ecosystems and address these different challenges. They're not just about conservation, they're about using nature strategically to reduce risks, improve well-being, and deliver co-benefits like carbon sequestration, flood control, clean air, etc. They also provide a powerful pathway for companies to meet expectations set out by the frameworks that we just went over. But here's the key point. In order to understand and in order to design and scale nature-based solutions effectively, you need robust assessments. So here at Tunley, we have 3 different approaches towards considering nature in business. The first one we're going to talk about is building a corporate nature strategy. And it's about aligning your operations with long-term resilience, helping promote improve stakeholder expectations, global biodiversity goals, nature positive pathways. Now, we've all heard of nature positive, but it isn't just a buzzword. It's a measurable goal to help halt and reverse nature loss and ultimately enhance biodiversity. So we have nature positive pathways, which is a structured approach to guide companies from baseline understanding to measurable action. And we typically break this down into 5 steps, which again is the baseline: setting target, having a nature action planning, and then offsetting, and then you'd be able to scale up. So in the last approach that we have is a more site level biodiversity assessment type. And this again is broken up by a baseline assessment. And we then help clients enhance their habitats, create adaptive management plans, and we use geospatial mapping such as GIS to identify areas or habitat types and showcase the results in a spatial way. Now we want to look more zoned in on one particular type of assessment, which I mentioned previously is the supply chain biodiversity footprint, or the SCBF. And it's one of the most powerful tools we can use to help businesses understand and reduce their biodiversity impact. It quantifies biodiversity by using a metric called species year, and that's biodiversity loss potential. It also identifies biodiversity hotspots across your supply chain, and it links pressures like land use change, climate change, pollution to specific business activities.
Hi, everyone. As Alice mentioned earlier, I'm Benedict. I'm the head of ESG at Bespak. We've been working closely with biodiversity experts in Tunley, specifically Tara, to help map the impact of our operations, and not just carbon emissions, but how our land use kind of affects nature. And what I'll be sharing today is a case study of Holmes Chapel and Kingston, 2 of our sites in the UK, where we've been able to quantify and start acting on our ecological impact. So the first step we took as a business, I think what we wanted to do was to try to carry out a materiality assessment to help us cut through the noise and identify what the ESG issues are for Bespak. So what we wanted to do was to make sure that at the end of the day, once we had identified our material topic, and Bespak and biodiversity as identified as one material topic, we wanted to make sure that whatever strategy we put in place needs to align with regulatory standards or governance frameworks or any regulation. Very good example is the CSRD, the GRI framework for biodiversity 2016, and like Tara mentioned earlier, the task force on nature-related financial disclosures, just to make sure that our reporting goals and strategy are kind of aligned with these frameworks. And based on that, the next step and the last step was to identify or to come up with a tool that will help us proactively address our impact on biodiversity. And that tool, we looked at the supply chain biodiversity footprint that helps us to identify or assess our direct impact on nature, which is looking at our on-site activities and its impact on nature, and also the indirect impact on nature, which is looking at the footprint of our entire supply chain. On this slide gives you the methodology we use. I talked about the CBF. So we looked at it from a dual lens. So we looked at on-site impact and we looked at supply chain impact. On the on-site impact, key findings showed that on our Holmes Chapel site, we have over 119 biodiversity units, which is in layman terms, that's more than 100 football pitches worth of land currently on the site. So we have vital habitat species on the site. We have bats, we have birds, we have woodland wildflowers in our Holmes Chapel site. Tara earlier mentioned about the life impact, the LCA, and what we did for that, our supply chain biodiversity footprint. We're able to analyze the impact of our purchase or supply chain or sourcing for raw materials on both sides. And the results showed that about 0.215 species per year, which is equivalent to, for our current or rather ongoing purchase of supply of raw materials. In our Holmes Chapel site, our current purchasing activities reflect an extinction of one species every 13 years. I think what's most important for everyone on this call is to understand what were the lessons learned, what we learned along the way, what worked for Bespak and what didn't work for Bespak. I would always want to start with the bad side or the downside, what didn't work for us. First things first is trying to paint a very good picture of what our roadmap or final result will look like. And a very good example is requesting for activity-based data as opposed to the data that's readily available. Secondly, what didn't work for us was imposing deadlines. We didn't want to, we set it off by imposing deadlines and asking teams to share data and information with us within a specific period of time. And they not being fully aware of what the study entailed or what the project entailed. So if I go back to the talking points in terms of what worked for Bespak, the first one is we started off with what we can measure. So we didn't have any baseline data at both sites. So we started off with what we can readily access and what data can we readily access. And that was our supply and that was our spend data. Our spend data was readily available and we shared that data with Tara. And Tara was able to come up with the analysis and share the results with us. Second lesson learned is focusing on low-hanging fruits, not aspiring to get to the sky or hit the limits, but what you can easily access. You can send an email or you can make a request and you can get that data within the next week or two. So we try to focus on just low-hanging fruit. What can we get? And a very good example is the activity, is the spend data as opposed to activity-based data that would have taken the business like 3 months to obtain. So once we got the readily available data, we shared that with a consultant and they were able to carry out the necessary study. So beyond this just talks about the actions we're now taking beyond the assessment. So yes, again, we didn't want it to be a tick box exercise that we've carried out our footprint, biodiversity footprint. We know what the results are. We know what the impacts on species are across a long period of time. So what we've been able to use with the result, what we've been able to do with the results of the assessment, it's helped us enhance our ESG risk mapping across our scope 3 supply chain. So we know where the highest risks are coming from our top 50 suppliers or our top 50% spend. And also we're now planning to carry like a supplier engagement session again with Tunley in September, aligned with high impact materials. As a result from the SCBF, we're able to identify our top suppliers. Now we want to engage those top suppliers in a capacity building workshop and engage them to see how we can start decarbonizing, how we can start reducing our footprint on carbon emissions in tangent with nature. And also we're not trying to also integrate biodiversity metrics into our procurement system. What I mean by that is we currently have an ESG scorecard within the business, but now we've included biodiversity metrics in our scorecard. So the questions we send out to our suppliers also includes a question on biodiversity. We want to understand what the supplier is doing to impact to reduce their impact on nature. And then based on the result of this assessment, we've been able to identify where do we currently stand in terms of committing to SBTN, which is a science-based target for nature. And based on, we've concluded the assessment, so we're currently on stage 2 or step 2, which is prioritizing which action plan do we want to implement. And then we go ahead and set a target and submit those targets for validation. And just to also conclude that the assessment provided a very clear view of where the hidden environmental impacts are. I think there was a study earlier in the year that said SB 500 that said the next big topic after climate is biodiversity. So there's some hidden footprints and not just carbon emissions. And biodiversity is a very, very up and coming environmental topic. And it's been very eye-opening working with Tunley in the past year in helping us identify our direct and indirect impacts on nature.
So this is essentially just a summary of the key tools for all different types of biodiversity assessments that you can carry out. A few of them we've already kind of discussed, so the Nature Capital Protocol, as well as Encore. Encore is helping look at sector-specific environmental dependencies and impacts. A really noteworthy one is IBAT, or the Integrated Biodiversity Assessment Tool. And then again, TNFD, LEAP, we've gone over, SBTN, the life cycle impact assessment tools, and different models such as Globio to look at biodiversity footprinting. But one we haven't really touched on is, again, that idea of taking the different silos and combining them together, is looking at climatic models alongside IUCN scenarios or species distribution scenarios to help not just look at where you are right now in terms of nature, but also in 20 years, 30 years. So just like we do projections for financial data, you can do this for nature impact data, and this just helps you safeguard business risk and reduce any future risk and help make sure that any of the decisions that you're making as a business are long-term decisions. So we talked a lot about risks, the regulations, and the reporting requirements, but we haven't really talked about the opportunity side of the equation for biodiversity being considered by business or considering nature. So there are really 6 key benefits for businesses that integrate biodiversity into their strategy. And as risk reduction, whether it's regulatory fines, reduction of that risk, supply chain distribution, reputational fallout, etc. Also, it'll help increase reputation and brand value. So there's a lot more pressure on companies and businesses to be environmentally credible. There's also market access. So depending on public procurement and ESG linked finance, they're increasingly tied to environmental performance, including biodiversity metrics. So that's another huge benefit of considering nature. Also, operational resilience. It will just help future-proof your business. Capital attraction and regulatory readiness. So just making sure that all these benefits really showcase, because you're considering nature, it will just enable your business to be that much more successful and able to make sustainable long-term decisions. As we close, I just want to bring it back to the fact that nature is the foundation of sustainability, and whether you're working on climate targets, water security, supply chain resilience, etc., nature underpins it all. And it's really the infrastructure that helps sustain life, economies, and well-being. And when we embed nature into our strategies and our business strategies, not as an afterthought, but as a central pillar, we can unlock a better way of doing business, a more resilient way, more future ready, and more in tune with the needs of our planet and with reputational opinion. And at Tunley, we believe in helping organizations build that future by providing the assessments we've discussed, the tools, the advisory support to help make science-aligned action on nature. And thank you very much.